Folks, we're back with Jamie McCarthy from Port City Air once again. We're going to talk about some other things some planning issues, execution issues, and some great lessons learned from a fixed base operator and one of the directors. Jamie, good morning. It's great to see you again, brother.
Good morning. It's afternoon out here on the East Coast, and it's still morning out there in Utah. But
Yeah, we got a few more
same to
minutes.
you, sir. Good to see you. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. And once again, thanks for hosting us.
You're welcome. We had a blast.
Okay.
It's great to see you and Val.
Oh,
And
hang
Matt
on.
also. Matt could. Yep.
Hang on a second. Hang on a second. Let me pause the recording. And once again, thanks for hosting Valerie and I out there. We had a blast. And of course, you and I, as two ramp rats running around the candy store. And the great part is you own the candy store.
Yeah, it was. It's definitely it's a lot of fun. I get into this business. God, I spent 15 years in a different industry entirely. I came from commercial, industrial, electrical, and about, I don't know, 17, almost 18 years ago now, I switched careers because I just decided I didn't like what I did anymore. And I decided to get into aviation largely because of my brother, who a few years before me got into aviation. He loved it so much that I said, well, I'll give that a try. And it could not have been a better decision for me. But, and I do get to, at least in a manner of speaking, own the store. I am responsible for the facilities here and all the day-to-day operations, at least on the FBO side. I do have you met Austin, my counterpart over terminal services. And if I'm being real, I mean, Austin probably has forgotten more about operations than I know. I come from, my background is actually aircraft maintenance. And so I moved into this role a couple of years ago because the company just grew too big for one person to handle that. So I took care of things, I took over down here at this end, and it's my baby. I've been doing that for a little over 2 years now. Absolutely love what I do. Love the people I work with. I mean, I think I say it in the video out on the ramp, but I just have an amazing staff here, from the line services people who work on the ramp. And I don't think the other day when we were out on the ramp, I don't think I talked about my CSR team, who are also incredible in dealing directly with customers and maintaining that high level of service we expect. And it often falls to the CSRs at night when our military office isn't around. When we have that drop in KC-135 or whatever it is, who say, hey, we're 25 minutes out. Is there any way you can get us 8 hotel rooms? And it's like, they look at each other like, I don't know, can we? And they try, but sure enough, they manage it. They pull out some tricks. So, and that's everybody here, all very dedicated people.
Hey, I got a question for you, and
Sure.
and probably a great lesson learned for people that are making career changes. Okay, like I'm sure you had some fears and doubts about, should I do this? Should I not do this? That went through your mind. Talk to my listeners a little bit about what you were feeling and thinking, making a pretty substantial career change,
Yeah.
and then finally getting to where you're at now, and it's bliss, isn't it?
Yeah, at 34, I mean, bliss, boy, it's a challenging industry. There are days, I'll get into that later, but I mean, at 34 years old, you wake up and you realize that, at least in my case, that you didn't you didn't like what you did anymore. I'd been doing it for quite a while. I, had a really good job, actually. I was making very good money. But I wasn't happy, first and foremost, with the caliber of people I worked with. I couldn't really trust my coworkers. I couldn't trust my customers. I had customers, in that industry, burn me pretty bad on things. And after a while, you just kind of wake up one day and you think, dude, do I really want to put up with this anymore? And, I just woke up one day and I was like, no, I don't. And I went downstairs and I gotten dressed for work, and I looked at my wife and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And she was like, you haven't been happy for a while, so don't, just go back to school. You've talked about, becoming an aircraft aircraft mechanic like your brother Bobby. Just do that. And I was like, do you think we can do this? And she said, yeah, I mean, we'll have to. And this is where a lot of the trepidation comes in, right? She said, well, we'll have to tighten our belts. You won't be able to work full time, but we can make it work. And so I did. And you are at that age, there's a lot of doubt creeps in. I mean, I already had a daughter at that point, right? The one daughter, and you're getting into something. And I knew I could work with my hands. I knew I was mechanically inclined, so that part of it was pretty easy to figure out. But you start going through the process of you get into school for to get your A&P, and you're in there with. I mean, I'm 34 years old again, and I'm in there with people in their early 20s. A couple of them teenagers, right? So it's very much and there were a couple other people who were older as well, like a couple of transitioning out of the military. So they were in their mid 20s to early 30s, but for the most part they were much younger. And I'm like, am I like an old man getting into a young man's game? I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, it's the right choice. And then after I got comfortable in school, I started to realize, between my instructors and the people I would meet in the industry that would come in to do things with us, mentor us and things like that. I'm like, yeah, this is the right place to be. I graduated school, got my A&P, and my first job right out of school was, I was really fortunate. My first job right out of school was at Gulfstream in Westfield, Massachusetts. Back then in 2007, it was still known as GDAS, General Dynamics Aviation Services, and they also took care of, along with Gulfstream products, Challengers, Dassault products, Falcons, Hawkers, because I think that was it. But and they've since transitioned. Now they don't do any of that stuff anymore. It's straight up Gulfstream and only Gulfstream. But I'm fortunate in that my first job in the industry was with the premier company of business jet manufacturers, and I got to be inducted into the industry, or indoctrinated, if you will, working for a really good repair station that did everything the right way. And you don't come into a situation where I know people who their first job in the industry has been somewhere where they're not exactly the best, right? And you learn bad habits when you're right out of school. But when you come out of school and your first job is working for the best of the best, you develop the best habits. And so as far as lessons learned, that's a great one. Carry the best habits with you throughout your career. Don't take bad habits to begin with, and you'll have to unlearn them later on. You don't want to do that. You want to, when you get somewhere, you want to focus on and take mentoring from the best of the people at wherever you are, and take the rest and throw it in the trash. I was there for about almost 2 years. Left there, went to a few different places, kind of figuring out where I fit into the industry. Wound up at Hanscom Field in Bedford, Massachusetts, not too far from here, for about 10 years, until I came here very early in 2019. And I've been, so what is that, a little over 5 years now, maybe getting my years all confused here, but I've been here just over 5 years. Spent my first 3 years here in maintenance, and then the past 2 years again in operations. But when I look back at that journey of that, 17 plus years of being in aircraft maintenance, I couldn't be happier with the choice I made. But you don't know any of that going into it, that it's going to work out that way. So there's where the fear comes in early on. But if there are any listeners out there who are thinking of getting into aviation and making a career change, yes, I can tell you it is going to be difficult. At 35 years old, I was at Gulfstream, and I've got literally 21-year-old, and I'm learning from them, and 21-year-old guys, and they're like, this is how you do it. And I'm like, you have to swallow all that pride and just be a sponge, and just be a knowledge sponge, and do things the right way. And I will say that if you're not prepared to swallow your pride and take direction from people younger, and even though they're a lot younger than you, they're going to be much more experienced, then don't try to make the change. You need to have the right mindset to do it. And some of the other, fears, there are still days, even as long as I've been doing it now, there are still days when you heard of the term imposter complex, right? Last May, I was at the NPMA Petro conference, which is a military, very centric on military fueling, like heavy fueling. And I was asked to present at a symposium for, it was basically sitting in front of on a dais with a bunch of other people. And the audience was all like military POL people, right? And it was the theme was how are they going to transition into aviation fuels in civilian life? And I'm sitting there and I've got like the vice president of the biggest interplaner in the world on my left. To my right, I've got the vice president of fuels for Southwest Airlines, the vice president of fuels for American Airlines. And I'm just a guy from an FBO in New Hampshire. I'm like, what am I doing up here? Right. You're going to be surrounded with the most amazing people if you get into this field. And there are times when I'm like, how did I get here? Like, do I deserve to be here? But I mean, I did some things right to get where I am too. So, you got to work through those tough periods, and you got to believe in yourself. That's self-confidence also is extremely important in this job, as I'm sure you can attest to, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I would still recommend it. It's tremendous. You'll work with the best people, and you get to do cool stuff every day, right? You get to work around airplanes.
Yeah, you get to
How
work
many
around
people
airplanes.
don't get to say that?
Yeah. Hey, before you and I started here, we were talking about issues in maintenance and some of the issues that you're having with maintainers and things like that. Why don't you talk to that just for a few moments? Because that's a really fascinating story you were telling me about that.
Yeah. Well, the industry is going to be in really bad shape soon. It actually already kind of is, to be honest. What prompted that conversation we were having is we were talking about the airplane, what was it, the 777, the wheel fell off,
Yeah.
and then another aircraft landing gear collapsed, and we've been seeing, and this is also, all Part 135 operation. We've been seeing some maintenance issues pop up, and they're often related to human factors, which is it's troublesome, but the reason why it's so near and dear to my heart, obviously, is because I come from maintenance in the first place. And I see that out there in the field, the average age of mechanics is going up and up and up. And that's because there haven't been nearly as many younger mechanics coming into the pipeline, right? And filling all the roles of the people who are transitioning out as they start to retire. And aviation maintenance is so heavily reliant on tribal knowledge. And when those people leave, the tribal knowledge goes with them. And so having less and less mechanics for more and more aircraft out there and more complex aircraft is going to manifest in, I think, some more incidents. And it worries me. So I've been really spending a lot of time and effort trying to help organizations. One of them being like Nashua Community College. The city of Nashua is about an hour west of here, has a community college, and they just started an A&P program. And I've been working with their board of labor resources development. I'm actually on the board in trying to come up with ways to get young people into the program. And also, one of the things I tell them is, hey, you're really focused on these high school kids, right? You want to get into the program. But there are also a lot of people like me out there who were in their late 20s, maybe mid 30s, who were dissatisfied with what they were doing and might be interested in a change of career. And some of these people you might really want. So let's not forget about them. Let's not forget about, that group. And also, being frank, the industry, and this goes for pilots and mechanics, but the industry has, for a very long time, ignored the talents and abilities of 51% of the population. And by that, I mean women. I have found that aviation has been very welcoming to women who show interest in the field, but it doesn't actively pursue that talent pool in the way that I think it should. And so, that's another load we can mine to find more AMPs and more capable mechanics to keep these things flying. And that goes for pilots as well. The pilot shortage has been very well publicized. The mechanic shortage has not. And that's, I think, part of the reason why I'm trying to shout this from the hilltops that, and I'm saying this to a pilot, so I have to realize that it may not go over so well. But the fact of the matter is they will fly themselves someday. And it might be 40 years from now. But you may know this. The Air Force recently experimented with single pilot operation in the KC-46 Pegasus, and it was successful. And so the first step is they'll be single pilot 121 operations, airliners, which may alleviate the need for some pilots, and that pilot shortage may become not such a burden. Eventually, in the future, somewhere, I think they'll be remotely piloted. There'll be nobody in the cockpit, but there might be somebody on the ground flying it. But they're never going to change their own engines. They're never going to change their own wheels. Their avionics are not necessarily going to fix themselves. There'll be some things that'll be self-healing, but mechanics are always going to be very necessary. And so I think the mechanic shortage is going to become a much more acute problem especially within the next decade to 20 years. It's going to be a real big issue. So, this kind of ties into, bringing back the trades, right? This fairly recent focus on, you can thank Mike Rowe for that, on, let's reemphasize the trades, bring the trades and give them the respect that they deserve. And I love that. I also think that it's okay to get a trade and also pursue higher education along with that, right? The two together, they're unstoppable. But, so aircraft mechanics, almost all of us fly, right? We don't necessarily pilot the aircraft, but almost all of us fly commercially at one time or another. You want to feel safe up there. We need to do more for mechanics and pilots as well.
God, that's a great discussion, brother.
It is. And I could go, it's a great back and forth discussion as well. Might be a good one for another time. Maybe we do another podcast on some more people in the room to talk about it, but it could be a great roundtable.
And you mentioned something too about remotely piloted vehicles. How long have we been doing drones?
Right. Exactly. The difference is we're just not putting people on them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. But Predator drones have been around, for a very long time. And look at the sophistication of those now, of a drone over Afghanistan being flown from Indian Springs, Nevada, over those thousands of miles, and the latency between the actual stick input to the airplane or vehicle actually moving, maybe a second or two, maybe, but
that's the key word right there, latency, right?
Yeah, it is,
minimize that.
Yeah, I know. And when you think about it, if you could shrink that to where you're flying a vehicle 8,000 miles away and it reacts as soon as he or she makes the stick input, then hallelujah, And of course, as you know, these vehicles, these drones are staying up for longer periods of time, 36, 48 hours on a tank of gas, and of course it's going to be different, probably carrying cargo or carrying passengers or whatever. Okay. But you have to remember too, Amazon has looked into this already, delivering packages to people's doorstep with drones, which is going to cause the Federal Aviation Administration to have to change a lot of the ways that they think right now, because like you said, we're always thinking about pilots, a manned aircraft, because it's always been that way. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way anymore.
Yeah, it's like the default thought process, but you always have to evaluate those as technology progresses. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, hang on.
But are they doing aerial refueling for drones yet?
Yes, they are.
Are they? Okay, I didn't. Okay, yeah, I didn't know that.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because Omega, the air refueling company, has been doing a lot of things with the Navy, and it was called the UCAV, Unmanned Combat Air Vehicle, but now they're actually trying to integrate drones as refuelers. and it's called the Stingray drone. It's made by Boeing. It goes up, it's got about 8,000 pounds of gas that it can pass through the drogue. And it's all done, mission planning, GPS, all those kinds of things. And believe it or not, Omega and this UCAV vehicle, I think it was like 2015 or 16 that they hooked up for the very first time. And getting into the drogue is not easy, okay? Because you've got something about the size of a human fist
Yeah.
that you're trying to put inside that socket, okay, and get it connected.
Yeah.
And that thing was just plugging right in, boom, 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 boom. So yeah, they're looking at that, and I have actually seen schematics of the Ford class carriers, Jamie,
Yeah.
with the refueling drones as part of the air wing on the deck in the schematics.
Hmm.
And making a ready room in the aircraft carrier into a control center for the drones.
Yeah, so that's eye-opening. I never thought about whether or not drones would be being aerial refueled or doing the refueling. So yeah, good to know.
So here's one of the interesting things that they had to overcome. And I flew with he's the president of Omega now, but he was a 135 guy like I am. And we were both stationed in Okinawa together. And talking to him, there was obviously some really interesting technological things that they had to overcome. And one of them was the stabilizers on the 707 would sometimes blank out the signal from the GPS. And that
Oh,
was one
really?
of the things they had to deal with. Okay.
Oh,
How
yeah,
do we
because
keep
it's
the
up,
people?
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got this thing refueling behind you, and all
Right.
of a sudden the stabilizers of the 707 would blank out some of the signals. Okay. And somehow they got around that. um, there are airplanes out in the Air Force fleet that actually operate with 8 GPS signals feeding the systems because they need incredible precision when you're dropping weapons. And in my tanker, it was 4 GPS satellites with 1 in reserve. But
Hmm.
I know in some of the strike aircraft and some of the intelligence collection aircraft, it's 8 with 1 in reserve. So there's all of these kinds of navigation issues that you have to deal with and everything. And it looks like we've been able to overcome those and do
Very
well.
cool.
Yeah, I've got some really cool video of that too. They had a chase plane. They always have a chase plane out there watching what's going on, and it was actually videotaping everything that went on. And here's the other thing, obviously, how do you get that drone back aboard the aircraft carrier? When I was working at Rockwell, they
They're
had this
snagging
thing.
them in nets, aren't they?
No, they're not.
No?
They're actually catching the wires.
Oh, okay.
They're actually catching wires. Now, the Scan Eagle, which is the smaller drone that they use off of the cruisers and destroyers, they throw up a big net and it runs
Yeah,
into the
okay.
net.
That must be what I've seen then.
But the UCAV was actually being shot off the aircraft carrier. It's got the same nose toe that an F-18 does, and it's got a hook like an F-18 does. And the TTNT data link signal was so good that the Navy told us, hey, you got to put some slop into that because the hook was hitting the same 4 inches every time the thing landed. I mean, think about that. It was hitting in the same little 4-inch box.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And it was taking the anti-skid surface off of the carrier deck.
Oh,
And
yeah,
that's why
because
they
it's always
said,
yeah, you're
yeah,
right.
it was because it kept
Just
hitting the
digging it
same
up. Always.
spot.
All
And
right.
they said, you got to build some slop into this thing. So, like 6 or 8 inches or something like that. But the first time that the UCAV landed an arrested landing on an aircraft carrier, the yellow stripe down the center of the landing area split the UCAV's nose wheels. It was literally right between the nose wheels. It's the craziest thing. I remember the Navy showed us the video at Rockwell of the thing landing. And of course, they've got the camera in the deck, and the UCAV ran over the top of the camera and everything, and they could see it literally split in half the 2 nose wheels when that thing landed. It landed on the center stripe, and the hook hit in that 4 inches. And that was a really fascinating conversation with the Navy folks at Patuxent River when they said, "Hey, we need you to build some slop into this thing because it keeps taking the anti-skid off of the carrier decks because the hook keeps hitting the same 4 inches, 4 or 6 inches." You know, so if you can overcome
House
those
days are
kinds of things,
numbered, Mark. That's what I'm saying.
I know, but you know, and I've always said to people too, you know, the world is always going to need pilots. And like you mentioned, on the ground, in the air, it doesn't matter now.
Well, there's
But
also some decision making, right? Like
there
there's
is,
things I don't know that you'll ever want to trust to machines.
correct. And that's one of the things that so many people talk about is because the computer cannot reason like the human brain can.
Right.
You can feed it all the rules of engagement that you want, but somehow, some way, that drone armed with GBU-12 500-pound bombs or Hellfire missiles is going to be put in a situation that you didn't like program it for.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so that human in the loop is both the cognitive brain and reasoning portion of striking a target, but it's also the weakness in that same thing
Right.
too, that same cycle at the same time. So, you know, you and I could go for a long time about this. Hey, that's a good question. Have you ever had to deal with UAVs, drones, and anything at Port City?
No. Interestingly, to fly a drone around here, you need a special permit to fly on the field. I do know that ATC up there, I think, has had to call the authorities on a few drones that have operated too close to the field.
Yeah, yeah.
In terms of like, have they ever flown in a drone, like a military drone or anything like that? No, we haven't had that. However, I will say our repair station did recently sign an agreement to be a service center for a drone manufacturer that we still haven't actually seen one of them in the field yet, but they're going to be coming up. And this is an interesting point too, that there's so much technology in these things, and one of that translates, and one of them is batteries. Not to mention all the avionics, which is very similar to the stuff in principle to the things that we install, because we're a Garmin service center and we install a lot of Garmin products.
Yeah.
So we have that knowledge base, but also I'm one of the things I want to start here at our repair station is a battery shop, because I'm looking at all the potential for these advanced air mobility aircraft, and they're all at this stage battery powered. Hydrogen hybrid may be a thing in the future, will be a thing in the future, in my opinion. But for now, it's batteries. Somebody's going to need to take care of those batteries, and they're going to need to know how to cap check them. They're going to need to know how to condition them and how to repair them. And I see that as a big opportunity for us, especially at a field like this, where I think we could eventually be an AAM base someday, flying, small groups from here to, say, Logan, to take long distance flights overseas or domestic, because there are certain inherent limiting factors to the smaller advanced air mobility aircraft that doesn't really make them suitable for longer distances. But they'd be great for getting people to and from the feeder airports to fly city pairs. So I kind of see that as an opportunity for a field like ours and a repair station like ours. But that's kind of a tangent. But we do kind of have our eye on that. We're thinking about drones in the future and the electric aircraft, because I think we're standing on the biggest revolution in aviation since the turbine engine, which is electric aircraft or hydrogen powered aircraft. But these small VTOL aircraft that can take people on short hops and don't need runways and need relatively small areas to operate from.
And everybody's talking about that too, aren't they? If Tesla can do it, why can't airplanes do it? If cars are doing this, and are like self-driving in some aspects too. But talk to us too about handling batteries. There's a lot of issues when you're handling and maintaining batteries, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, in aviation right now, there are the three primary types of batteries: be lead acid, and lead acid are fairly maintenance free for the most part. There's not a lot you have to worry about with them. They run for X amount of time. You can condition them once in a while, but typically when they fail. You recycle them. Then you have NiCad, nickel cadmium batteries, which are a huge pain, because the cap checks, it takes sometimes 3 days to cap check and condition a NiCad battery. Each individual cell has to be monitored. They still require electrolytes. And you have to deep cycle them, and then it could fail the cap check, but you can deep cycle it and cap check it again. Sometimes you can deep cycle it a couple of times and get it to pass the cap check on the third time. And the reason people might say, well, that sounds kind of ridiculous. Why would you spend all that money? Because these batteries are $10,000 to $15,000 a piece. Some of them.
Yeah, they're
So,
really
yeah,
expensive
so
batteries.
you want right. You might have to replace a cell or two, and they're at $1,000 a piece. But at the end of the day, it's still worth it. I mean, there are NiCad batteries out there. There's the component shells that have been in service for many, many years. And you just keep replacing components,
Yeah.
and and then so NiCads are their own kind of special handling. There are issues with thermal runaway. They can catch fire in very rare occasions, but it's not very common, and if you're careful, it's not going to happen. The lithium batteries are the ones that they're getting all the bad press, for one thing, as being dangerous. And the threat of the lithium batteries is once they catch fire, they're extremely difficult to put out, and they burn very, very hot. But that's where understanding how to handle them and how to deal with them is so important, and why I want to be on the cutting edge of that, and have that knowledge base going into it. Rather than playing catch up, I want to be ahead of that curve. So I've been in contact with a lot of these people about that. As a matter of fact, there's a advanced air mobility manufacturer to the north of us in Burlington, Vermont, which is up on the Canadian border. It's not exactly close, but it's not that far away. I got to tour that factory in September and had a great time. They've got a fantastic product up there. Beta Industries, the Alea is the name of that aircraft. Great place, great people. But it really remains to be seen how it shakes out. One of the problems with batteries, and this, is as current battery chemistry goes, it's heavy on lithium and cobalt, two metals that are getting harder to source. And so unless battery chemistry changes radically, they're going to have the same problem with electric vehicles, road-going vehicles. And I drive a Tesla. I'll be the first one to tell you, it's a great car, but it's not perfect by any means. It's not a one-to-one replacement for a gas vehicle. But getting battery raw materials is going to be an issue, and it's going to become increasingly an issue. There's talk about new battery chemistry that will alleviate that, but it's still several years away and on the horizon. And the question now becomes, do we wait for that, or do we develop more of the hydrogen hybrid technology that has a lot of promise? But yeah, we'll see. Your guess is as good as mine, honestly. If I knew, I'd.
Yeah, and because
future would be secure.
Well, the KC-135, had a battery in it, okay, and of all places, it's in the bathroom. You're standing up and doing your thing.
In an airplane sometimes.
Yeah, you're standing up doing your thing, and then look down. There's this big honking battery on the floor. But again, that had required some special handling when they were taking the battery off and putting a new one on.
Yeah.
And
28 volts DC too. That's the other thing. Yeah. I've seen people get really hurt. DC hits hard. Yeah. It's no joke. I'm always really careful. I tell people, of course, here I am with a key. But the guys who work the floor, and I don't handle batteries anymore, but I've seen this happen to people. They pull the battery out, and the two probes, they're not like a car battery. They don't sit on top. They're recessed, but they're still accessible, right? If you don't put a cap on it. Well, I had a guy pull one out one time, and he had metal on his, badge lanyard. Yeah. And it went right across those terminals and welded to the terminals, and it sort of made a bunch of sparks and stuff and burned a hole in his shirt. And, he kind of pulled away real quick, and the thing popped off. And it's like, this is a guy who was actually ex-Air Force, come to think of it. And I'm like, man, that's a rookie move. You've been doing this for a while. You should know better than that, Jeff, And but these things just go to show you this happens than anybody. But yeah, DC can be really nasty. So the special handling procedures, it's like always put cap and plugs in everything. Be careful when you're removing it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Good discussion, because you don't think of that. You hear it all the time with the cars and everything like that, and there's been a lot of press about, okay, when are we going to have battery operated airplanes or hydrogen powered airplanes? And again, you being a maintainer, okay, well, here's some of the things you got to think about when you're going to do that. Yeah.
So
Um, next subject I want to get onto is you guys handle a lot of very big airplanes.
Mhm.
You know, I met your Antonov rep there, and you've had the Antonovs come in, you've had C5s come in. You know, tell my listeners what it's like to have one of those come in on the ground, all the things that you have to handle one, and tell every, tell everybody the C5 tow bar story too. And I'll remind you about that, you know, as you go through all this, because you get these big airplanes, and of course at a base like Travis or Dover, where C5s are going in and out all the time and everything, it's not a big deal. Okay. But you as a fixed base operator really went out and did the things that you needed to do to get those government contracts to do these kinds of airplanes, which I think was really, really smart. Okay. And
Yeah,
you told me
yeah.
that story. I thought it was just fabulous. Okay. Because for pilots like me, you know, flying in a big airplane, I know I've got a place that I can go where everything is right there that needs to handle it. But talk to my listeners about what you have to think about when you know you have a really large airplane like a C5 or an Antonov coming in, what you have to do when it's on the ground, and what you have to do to prepare to get it out of the airfield too.
So it is the lesson of that one is be prepared for everything. It's definitely Boy Scouts. So when I was a kid with Boy Scouts, it was be prepared. It was always
Yeah,
and it's
Boy Scout
definitely,
motto.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so we did so the C5 is a great example. So it was not this past November, but the November before, so a bit over a year ago. There was a C5 out of Dover here. Now, because of our 11,321-foot runway, we're a really popular destination for big airplanes to do touch and goes and do sorry, my phone, and do any kind of you know practice flying, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So they were doing touch and goes here. It was middle of the day. The aircraft landed and went to power up to take off again. And with the C5s, the most recent version, the Mike models have a much bigger engine that increase their capability, but it also puts out a lot more bleed air. And so when they went to take off and they throttled up, they overpressured the bleed air ducts in the left wing root, and it blew out the duct. And so suddenly the aircraft fills with 400-degree, dusty, dirty air, and the crew thinks we just caught fire. So they throttle back and they haul the aircraft down, and they basically evacuate the aircraft. And then I think as they were evacuating, they realized, oh, wait a minute, this isn't a fire. And they knew what happened, because it's actually somewhat common issue with the C5 Mike models. It's happened before.
I didn't know
Unfortunately,
that.
this crew, what's that?
I didn't know that. I didn't
Yeah,
know
the
this is a
crew
common
the
thing.
crew told me this. They said they've had it happen a few times. But it usually just happens on takeoff. They power up. And this was
Yeah.
a story I was given. So and you know how grapevines work. But anyway, so
10% true.
exactly. So but interestingly, even though they were empty, they didn't have a tow bar on board. And I found out later that the reason for that being is if they take anything on the aircraft, including a tow bar, they have to have a load master. Well, they don't necessarily want to take a load master to do touch and goes, so they delete that part. Problem is, now they're dead in the water 7,500 feet down the runway, I think right in front of taxiway Charlie. And so now my airport's basically shut down. And I'm like, okay, this is a problem because we don't have a tow bar to get you off. And through the course of most of that day, we were shut down. They did let a Falcon take off tail to tail going the other way just to get out of there. But nothing could land. So, it was a good at least 12 to 15 hours. I think we were shut down until they decided they could fire up the number 3 and number 4 engine and then taxi off they isolated the bleed air system from the left side, just fired off with 3 and 4 and taxied off with with somebody up in the cupola, observing.
Yeah. Yeah.
We did get it off the runway under its own power, but they wound up, because they only had one shot at this. They said, well, let's do it one time and that's it. And they wound up putting them in a really bad spot. They parked them in a bad place in the apron that we needed for 46s and 135s running missions. So we're like, okay, we really need to move this thing because it's going to be here for like 2 weeks while they do this, while they fix it, and it can't sit there. So
Oh, jeez.
yeah, so we start making a bunch of furious phone calls. Eventually, Dover, the home base of the airplane, said, okay, we have a folding tow bar. They put it on a flatbed and they sent it up. And it showed up at 1:30 in the morning, of course, because that's just the way it works. And myself and our cargo manager went outside with a couple of forklifts at 1:30 in the morning and unloaded this thing. And if you've never seen a C5 tow bar, there's a portable one. And when I say portable, it takes a full 53-foot flatbed to move it. So it's really not all that portable, but it does fold in half. So you can at least do that. But this thing's, I mean, they're 60 feet long. It's something like 60 feet long when they're all said and done, all put together. So we
I'll put the
unloaded.
picture in the show notes because you sent me a picture of it on the flatbed, and I'll put that in the show notes so everybody can see this thing because it is massive.
It's pretty enormous.
Massive.
Yeah. So that night, we unloaded it. We ended up deploying it the next morning. We had the crew there to do it. They did send a maintainer up for that, and we ended up towing it over to the north ramp. But you don't have a lot of line staff who can say they got to tow a C5, and of course. So they're all out there taking selfies with it, and here I am towing a C5, and which is cool for them. It's line staff are funny. They don't always love to do things, but when it's a cool airplane, they're fighting over who gets to do it, right? And so, but the long story. So the rest of the interesting part of the story to me is that Dover has a bunch of these tow bars kicking around. And we're like, okay, well, why don't you just leave the tow bar with us? I'm like, oh, we can't do that. It's government property. I'm like, come on, talk to somebody. You guys do touch and goes here all the time. Like once a week, you're in here doing touch and goes. This is probably going to happen again someday. Why don't you just leave the tow bar? No, we can't leave the tow bar. Sorry. So they came up with a flatbed. They folded it in half. They took it away. And I'm like, thanks, guys. So we did end up our military department. One of our guys, Mark Brophy, is retired National Guard from the 157th, right over there at the other end of the field. He made a bunch of calls, and Joe Irvine, our cargo manager, made a bunch of calls. Eventually, we managed to find a tow bar that somebody was willing to send up here because they had a bunch of extra ones. So like, well, we're going to just cut it up for scrap so you all can have it. So they did send it up here. And so now we do have one on the field, and it's actually over at the guard base because they have the room to store it. So if we ever do need to tow another C5, we do have that capability. And recently just had to buy a C130 tow head so I can move C130s because, the universal bar isn't quite 100% right for it. So, they said it'd be great if you'd buy one of those. And we're like, all right, I guess we'll buy one. But that's what you have to do when you, again, being prepared for everything. We've long ago accepted that to do what we do, it's going to require an enormous capital investment. I mean, we also talked about cargo, and I can talk a little bit about how, the vertical integration part of it and how we, in order to do what we do, we had to have full cargo capability. Because if a C-17 comes in and it has essential cargo going overseas and it breaks down, well, you have to be able to remove that cargo from that C-17 and put it on the rescue airplane that send in its place, so it can make the cargo can make it to where its destination. And that requires main deck loaders, commanders, slave pallets, dollies. We have 4 forklifts, some of which are capable of lifting like 30,000 pounds. I mean, we have really big, heavy duty equipment here. And it was enormously expensive, and it takes a lot of training to train people how to use it. But it's a capability we have to have if we want to attract the C5s, the C-17s, the C-130s, the A400s, the Antonov AN-124. You mentioned those. We kind of have a special relationship with the Antonov company. And at one point over this past summer, we had 2 AN-124s on the ground at the same time, parked right next to each other. I sent you some of those pictures as well. And it was to the point where even the people with Antonov were like, this is unusual outside of Leipzig. We need to get pictures of this. They're not usually on the ground in the same place at the same time. And so everybody thought that was pretty cool. But Same deal. We need to be able to load and unload anything on that airplane because Antonov actually does take a lot of cargo that originates here in Portsmouth. It's not tech stopping through Portsmouth. It actually originates here from somebody like Raytheon or something like that. And so we need to be able to load it and send it on its way wherever it's going. They ship a lot of satellites from like Thales and other companies like that. Raytheon also does some satellite components that they take, big stuff, outside stuff. And so, you know, we specialize in that as well. You know, we do have a free trade zone in our warehouse over here. So that's another feather in our cap as it relates to cargo. And then, you know, there's the catering component. You know, we're capable of triple catering a 747 so that we can have the craft flights come through with the troop movements overseas. And you know, that's been a big thing for us. I mean,
And that's a lot of meals.
Ton of meals. I mean, it's yeah. So triple catering basically means however many souls you have on board that airplane, you need 3 meals for them. So if it's 300, you've got 900 meals. We've done as many as 1,200 for some of those Atlas flights that come through.
Gosh.
And you know, we could not attract that business. You know, Atlas for a long time they weren't coming here until we, you know, because they said, well, you know, you don't have a caterer that can do that, and we need to be able to take on catering at our tech stops. They would go to Boston where they have Lufthansa catering, right? And so, you know, my boss, being the visionary he is, said, well, you know, we'll buy a catering company, and everybody's like, you're out of your mind. We don't know how to cater. We don't know what we're doing. Like, we'll buy a catering company. We'll have, you know, we'll get the people who work there to upscale it, and it's gonna be tough, but it's gonna work, and it's gonna be great. And he was right. You know, it was tough, but we did make it work, and it has been great for us because we can now attract that business. So we're really, you know, we're very vertically integrated here. We also do all the terminal services here at the airport. You know, we do the pushbacks, we do the baggage, we do the terminal on the inside, and the ticket agenting for Allegiant. And that's really Austin's baby. That's what Austin handles. And that's an extremely complex and difficult part of the operation as well, that sort of exists in and of itself down there in its own bubble, but it's incredibly important to this airport that it be done well and managed well. So, you know, I let Austin worry about that. That's not my bag.
Yeah. Well,
he's great at that.
One of the things I got to tell my listeners too about load and cargo, we've talked about, you know, airplanes that we can drive on. Okay. Drive on, drive off of. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the KC-46, the KC-10, it ain't drive on, drive off, is it?
No.
Nope. You have to have a completely different loader. So you have to have completely different ground equipment.
Yeah.
In order to be able to do that. You know.
Yeah, and you can't do it with a forklift because most forklifts, A, they don't go that high, but B, when you go up with a forklift, there's all kinds of risk with tip over and stuff. So you need like a main deck loader.
Yeah.
You know, we have a Commander 30. I mean, I want to say that's $1 million piece of equipment just for that, you know. So yeah, you absolutely need those for loading the containers onto the 135s, the 46s, and the 747s. A lot of Atlas 747s and National 747s come through here that need cargo loaded that way.
They load high in the back behind the wings.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I know a lot of people out there don't understand the logistics of what it takes to move one cargo plane that is like 747, C-17, KC-10 size. You know,
yeah.
Particularly when I think they called it the D configuration in the KC-10, where you've got 75 packs and all their cargo and stuff in the back of the airplane at the same time. And they're refueling the F-15s on the way over. So they're getting gas on the ground and in the air when we're doing these big fighter drags. And it's incredible.
I mean, those people have to get overseas too, right? Their families and stuff. And you know, there's I love the KC-10s, you know, take 43,000 gallons of fuel every time they come through. Biggest bag in the business. I love those things, and they're going away, unfortunately. But great airplane.
Unfortunately, don't get me started on that.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on that. So, hey, brother, we've been going an hour. Do you need to take a break real quick or anything like that? I do.
I'm good if you're good. I can go a little while longer, no doubt. It's up to you.
Because I want to talk about the Anotovs, but we still got to talk about the P8s and parking the A10s and the bent wing too.
Oh yeah,
So hey, give me about 2 or 3 minutes here real quick. and I'll be
Bathroom
right
break?
back. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds good.
I'm gonna
I'll do
fill
that
my
myself.
cup back up too. I I drank all the stuff that's in it, and now my body is saying, "Hey, brother,
Yeah, I
you
could
need
use
to
some
go."
water myself.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be back here in like
Yeah.
10
Yeah.
minutes.
I've
Okay.
got 6 past on my clock here, so 10, 11 past. I'll be right back. Okay.
All right, cool.
Thanks.
Sounds good.
Okay. Now, we've talked about the big airplanes coming through, Jamie. You
Yep.
have a lot of the fighters and other things coming in too. And you told me a great story about the hogs, the A-10s.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk to us about what it takes for planning and some of the tools that you used? You said you had a software program, but you use something that a lot of people use every day too. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So back in the month of June, we talked about Operation Air Defender, right? Which was
Mhm.
uh, it was the largest joint NATO air operation in history. Happened in Germany last June. So I want to say 11 guard units from the United States took part in this exercise,
Mhm.
and it was pretty impressive. But the cool thing about it is Port City Air was selected as one of the primary tech stop locations and operating locations for Operation Air Defender for the units heading overseas to participate. And when I say it was Germany primarily, but there were also exercises happening in Turkey, Greece, and some other countries as well. And one of the groups that went over was the A-10 unit out of Kansas City, Missouri, and they were going over with 12 A-10s, and they needed somewhere to stop on the way. They also had a support KC-135 that went with them to, ferry them over and give them gas on the way. So now understand the A-10 is a slow airplane. So they started in May, a full month early before the rest
Yeah.
of everybody
Yeah.
else went out.
Yeah.
And I was giving the A-10 crew chiefs a hard time about that. But so they showed up, God, if it was middle of May, they start talking about coming in here, and they send an advance team out. So the advanced team out was two crew chiefs, Slippy and Mike. Great, great guys. I got to know them very well for the week plus that they were here on the way out. Went to dinner a few times. Um, and when they initially showed up, I had already scoped out an area to park their aircraft. And we have a program called Air PLX, which we can make, you can specify ramp sizes and all that stuff. And the A-10 is one of the aircraft that's in
Yeah.
there. So you can actually lay them out in a grid and see how they'll look when they're parked. And something I found was extremely helpful for that is the Google Measure feature in Google Maps. So I could actually look at my ramp exactly where I wanted to put them on a satellite image, measure it all out, and then transfer that over to the software to make a ramp, and then figure out how I was going to park everything. It was incredibly helpful, and the ability to pivot. And I'll explain that because originally I'm like, okay, we usually park the A-10s here. There should be plenty of room for a dozen of them. And it was actually 14 total because there were two coming out as spares.
Yeah. 2 air
They
spares.
expected a couple
Yeah.
of them to break and have to go home, which is exactly what happened, by the way. And at any rate, so I figured out where I was going to park them, had everything planned out and ready to go. Slippy comes out and he's looking at the area I'm going to park him because we went out to the ramp to do some recon. And he's like, I love it. There's just one problem. And I was like, well, what is it? He said, there are no ground points. Well, I put A-10s here all the time and nobody ever asked for ground points. And they said, yeah, well, our unit is really, really, they're sticklers for that. We have to have ground points. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a problem because this isn't going to work.
Yeah. Grounding the
So,
airplane because of static discharge is what that is.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and
right,
you're right.
exactly.
You're right.
Yeah,
It's a problem in some
yeah.
cases.
And you're supposed to do it when you're fueling. It's frequently not done depending on where you go.
Yeah.
When you're operating in a sparse environment, you sometimes just don't have the option, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, we did have the option, and I'm like, okay, well, I think there should be enough room on the cargo ramp. We should have grounding points there. So we went over there, we walked over there, looked around, and I'm like, yeah, this will work if we can fit them. Do we know we can fit them? Well, I don't know. Let me find out. So I went back into the office, and in about about a half an hour, I had the plan worked out using the Google measure, building this ramp in the system, and kind of dragging and dropping the airplanes in there. I'm like, yeah, we can make them fit. And they're like, all right, we'll do this. So within about an hour, we had a solid alternative backup plan to do that. So talk about lessons learned. Always have a backup plan, right? And if you don't have it ready to go, at least know how to make one quickly. You might actually
no plan ever survives its first contact in combat.
That's right. So yeah, so we made that work, and then they came in, and I don't know if you have the video of us parking the aircraft. That was a really cool day, because it's not very often you get that many attack jets or fighters in at the same time. But again, this was an unprecedented operation. For the month of June, we had 78 operations of C-17s come through. We had a bunch of them on the way out. They tech stopped pretty much overnight. And then on the way back, they did the same thing on their way home. Some of them overflew us on the way back. They didn't even need as much gas on the way back as they did going on the way out. And that's actually a testament to my staff, because since so many of those operations happened late at night and early in the wee hours of the morning, I had a bunch of my staff just rearrange their entire lives to make it happen at night, working double shifts, just switching to third shift, myself included. We all really flexed our schedules to make that happen. We had
when P8s come in. Why don't you talk to us about that?
Yeah,
like when the P8s show up at dark 30.
So we had we've been trying to get P8s, the U.S. Navy, to come through with their P8s quite a bit, because we've seen them going other places. We can watch the traffic and we know where it goes. So, my boss had wanted to get the P8s to start tech stopping through here. And one of the girls in the military office, Katie, who you had dinner with Katie Thursday night. And so, she was like, I'll take on this mission. So she made a bunch of phone calls, eventually pestered enough people to the point where they're like, all right, if it'll get you to leave me alone, I'll send some airplanes your way. And so they said, can you handle 6? And we're like, yeah, we have the ramps. Now, for those who aren't familiar, the P8 Poseidon is basically a big 737. It's like a 737 MAX. So it's a good sized airplane. So she's like, yeah, I think we can. So she checked with line and like, yeah, we have the space for them. But, the time frame that they want to bring them in was, we had 3 hours to quick turn 6 airplanes. So they start showing up at, dark 30. And we had to have them out of there by about 3:30 a.m. And so, we had a bunch of people, again, flex their schedules to make sure that we could do that. I was there that night. Katie came in that night. There's a great picture of her with 100 pizza boxes. And, all on a baggage cart, ready to go out there to the airplanes to give to the crews. Because one of the things we do here is, we really focus on the crew's comfort and convenience. We book their hotel rooms for them. We have 20 plus crew cars, just crew cars, and most of them end up being used by military crews. We buy pizzas for them when they need a hot meal when they're quick turning, because it's really nice to be able to have that when you stop somewhere. And so, those are some of the things, along with Portsmouth being an amazing town to stop and spend a couple of days in if you're rawning being remain overnight. These are all things that make us such an attractive place to go. So, we definitely work hard at that. But so they started showing up 2 by 2, 15 minutes apart. So they were all basically on the ground within about a half an hour. And, I've got, all right, let's roll up fuel trucks. So the fuel trucks start going out, hitting the aircraft. We're, distributing pizzas. We're taking crew back and forth to the FBO for bathroom breaks, so they don't have to use the lav in the aircraft, and, doing any necessary servicing. And by 3:30 a.m., they were all rolling out of there and taking off and headed over to, they were crossing the Atlantic somewhere, going to Europe. Not exactly sure what for. They wouldn't tell us. We didn't ask. So yeah, they're good times. I mean, those are the things that I live for, at this place. It's so much fun to watch an operation go off like clockwork, and, to be part of the group that makes that happen. And also to be one of the people that, the United States military can rely on to make that happen for them. So Air Defender was huge. It went off really well, along with the A-10s and all the C-17s, the C-130s, the 135s, the 46s, the C-5s, you name it. We had every type of aircraft coming through here from all over the States. We also had a flight of 8 F-16s come through, which was a really cool as well to see those. And the fighters they're dead sexy. They really are. I mean, they're not a huge money maker for us because they suck up so much logistics in terms of,
Yeah.
they don't take a ton of gas, but they sure are fun when they come in and then they take off on full burner. That's, everybody else is like, it's so loud. And I'm like, can you turn it up? Can you make it louder?
Yeah. I know.
That's what it is.
Can
So,
this get any better?
no, it
Particularly
doesn't.
if they're leaving at night or at
Yeah.
dusk
Oh
or
yeah.
something like that.
We didn't
But
we didn't get it that time around,
oh
but
my gosh, it's incredible at night.
the neighbors complain too much when they take off on full burner when it's dark around here. You active military base guys got to see a lot more of that than we do.
I've got a great story about that too. I lived in white cedar, which are like right off the end of the runway. And about 1:30 in the morning, a 2-ship cell of water wagons took off and all the car alarms in the parking lot went off. Okay.
Yeah, they will.
Went off. All right. And they were dragging a bunch of fighters over to Germany. They were supporting that. And I remember saying to myself, don't go to sleep yet, folks. There's another
There's more
set
coming.
30
Yeah.
30 minutes later. And
Yeah.
sure enough, 30 minutes later. And see, we were only leveling off like 600 feet because we had to bring the flaps up while the water was still burning. All right.
Oh, yeah,
And
right.
so we're down kind of low with really, really noisy engines. And sure enough, 30 minutes later, man, 2 more, and all the car alarms were going off again at 2
Folks
o'clock in
these
the morning.
days living around the airports don't know how good they have it, or maybe how bad they
Yeah.
have it. There's people like me who love the airplane noise, but
Oh, yeah.
they don't. They're so much quieter now than they used to be. The biggest of the jets
Oh,
with these
absolutely.
new high bypass turbofans, they're so quiet, and we still get noise complaints, and it still happens. But yeah, it's nothing compared to what it used to be. The
No.
old G2s sound like an F4 Phantom taking off.
Oh,
Same
yeah,
motor.
I know. I know that. Well, you have a Gulfstream story too, don't you?
I do. Yeah, this one's
This is how things go from bad to worse to good again. Tell us.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's not the kind of thing that you ever want to happen, but I think it's kind of an instructive story. So I had flashed back a couple of years now. So I had just taken over this role, and it's a Saturday, and it's the Saturday before the Super Bowl. And I had come in the office that day to get some work done, but I wasn't telling anybody I was going to be here, right? I didn't want people to know because I wanted to be left alone to get some work done, right? Admin stuff. So I'm sitting there at my desk, and I'm listening to the ground radio on my desk, and it said, and it's Jane, one of our concierges, and I hear her say, "I need a supervisor on the international ramp immediately." And I'm like, it's usually not a good thing, but I didn't think it was, that bad, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, about maybe 10 minutes later, I get a phone call on my cell, and it's one of my line staff. And I pick it up and I said, hello. And he said, hey, how soon can you be on the field? And I was like, well, actually, I'm here now. Why? He said, I need you down on the international ramp right now. And I was like, okay. And I just hung up. There's no reason to start
Yeah.
talking. We'll figure it
Yeah.
out soon enough.
Yeah.
So I hang up, I go outside, I get in a pickup truck, and I start driving down there. And the FBO is located about a mile and a half from the international ramp. The international ramp's 3/4 of the way down the field. So I'm driving down the flight line road, and I'm passing a pickup truck coming my way. Now, understand something. At this point, my mind has started to work.
Yeah.
And I start thinking back to the night years ago when I was on the ramp at Logan Airport, and we had a line staff member killed in a freak accident with a piece of equipment. And I'm starting to have sort of like flashbacks, like I'm remembering all the ambulances tear-assing over to the Boeing business jet, the BBJ, that was parked where the incident occurred. And I remember walking over, wondering what happened. And I remember someone coming up to me and go, don't go over there. Don't look. You don't want to see it. And it was really, really bad, really, really graphic. I won't get into details out of respect for Herb. But I start thinking about that. And the way people are acting is making me think that it's like an injury, or somebody's really either hurt or
Somebody's
killed.
hurt.
So I'm kind of like trying to prepare myself mentally. Well, as I'm driving down the vehicle service road, there's a pickup truck coming at me. And I flagged it down, and I says, young man sitting behind the wheel named Ben. And I said, hey, what am I walking into down there? And there's tears streaming down his face. And he says, bad accident on the international ramp. And I'm like, you're clearly in a lot of distress. I'm like, you need to calm down, drive slow, get back to the line shack, settle down. We'll be over. Just, try to stay
Yeah.
calm. Okay. And he
Yeah.
said, all right. And he headed back off. And so now I'm really wondering what's going on. Right. And I'm trying to drive down there, not speed, not break airport rules. And as I'm rounding the corner, I can now see the airplane. And as I get closer, I see there's a fuel truck butted right up against the winglet, the right winglet. And it's one of my 7,000 gallon fuel trucks.
Oh no.
And I'm like, oh yeah, that's not good. And I can see the airplane's kind of doing a lean to the side,
Yeah.
right? But there are no ambulances. There's fire trucks, but no ambulances. And nobody is milling around like anything is,
Yeah.
terribly urgent.
And there's nothing on the ground.
Right. And there's no fuel on the ground or anything like that. So
Yeah.
I'm instantly actually relieved,
Yeah.
because I'm thinking, okay, this is just, we hit the airplane.
Yeah.
And right away, dollar signs start flying in my head. But I'm thinking, all right, nobody's hurt or killed. We can fix equipment, we can fix airplanes. I can't, do that with people. If somebody gets hurt or killed, that's bad. So, and Steve, the guy who called me, walks up to me as I'm getting out of the truck, and he's like, yeah, it's pretty much exactly what it looks like. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is not great, but where's the owner? Where's the principal? Where's the crew? Where are these people need to talk to? So in assessing what had happened, the driver of the fuel truck was inexperienced. I mean, he'd driven the fuel truck, but enough to, in theory, know how to drive it. But before he came to work for us, he'd never driven anything bigger than a Toyota Camry. So he forgot where the fueling point was on the Gulfstream. He stopped off the tip of the wing, and he was a little too close. So he got out, he found the fueling point. He went to get back in the truck and then drive over to the fueling point, cut it too close, and hit the winglet.
Mhm.
So yeah, we assessed everything. We decided if we back the truck, with the fire department present and everybody there, we decided if we back the truck off in the direction it came in, the airplane should be more or less okay.
Yeah.
The over limit travel indicator on the nose gear hadn't popped. The tires were still in good shape. The landing gear locks were still installed. Everything looked more or less okay. So we did that. We wound up pulling it off. And I then sort of had to turn my attention to dealing with the owner of the airplane, who was on the airplane, who, by the way, was on his way to the Super Bowl, is a sports talent manager out of Italy, who was on his way to the Super Bowl to make business deals the next day. And his family, they were all pretty shaken up. I did manage to calm them down initially. We got them on another plane out to the Super Bowl, so they did make their destination. And then what I did was I turned my attention to just making the situation right. Getting the aircraft in a hangar, getting access for a maintenance crew from Gulfstream to come out and assess the damage. Making the crew as comfortable as they could possibly be. And these two guys, Davis and Davida, they're a couple of Italian guys, nicest guys. I still talk to them semi-regularly. We exchange messages on Christmas and stuff. This is the greatest guys. But, we put them up in a really nice hotel. Guy, I must have spent $500 alone just on, 40-year-old Tawny Port, because they took a liking to that over at the library, the restaurant. And myself and Katie took them out a bunch of times. And, point is, at the end of the week, the airplane was stuck here. The owner sent a nice message and said that, Port City Air did an amazing job of taking care of their crew and handling the situation, and that you never want that kind of thing to happen, but they will come back. They will be repeat customers, and they have been back here a couple times since then. And so, look, mistakes happen, accidents happen. We actually uncovered some things about ourselves that, our training program wasn't sufficient. It could have been better. Had it been better, that may not have happened. So we modified the way we do things. We got better as a company because of that. And so, you always have to look at it in the final analysis as, can we at least get something good out of this? Because these things happen to everybody. They're going to happen at every field. There's ramp rash, there's hangar rash. It's a fact of life. So, the bad ones are the ones you don't learn from or you refuse to learn from. So if you can learn from it, improve, then by all means, you better do it.
As we say, lessons learned vice lessons observed.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
And it's a big deal when you have that kind of contact too, because they have to do a lot to the wing, to make sure everything is okay inside the wing, outside the wing.
So kind of cool story about that. They wound up taking the winglet off and they flew it out of here with one winglet. And they just speed taped over the opening for the other winglet. Yeah. And they flew it only over to Westfield, Massachusetts, where I used to work, by the way, where I started my career. And they put a new winglet on it and painted it and sent it, and it was good to go. It actually wasn't a terribly involved repair. You can unbolt the
it just
pull it
comes
off.
right
There's some
off.
de-riveting. It's not super quick, but yeah, there was no structural damage elsewhere to the airplane. So it wound up, it was still expensive. I mean, when you factor in all the rescue flights, because the airplane's down, you're on the hook for paying for that guy to take a NetJets aircraft from point to point. It ends up being very expensive, but again, nobody got hurt. The airplane's still in service. So yeah, could have been a lot worse.
And you just take care of the customer the way you're supposed to.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is great. That's great. Well, brother, we've been going at this for an hour and a half.
Yeah. Hey, is there anything else you want to talk about? I can do this all day.
I know we can. That's the problem, is you and I could keep going all day, I gotta tell a quick story on you though. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. To the listeners out here. I'm an old 135 guy, and he had 3 KC-135s on the ramp that were doing missions. And one was from Alabama, and it had a very cool piece of nose art on it that was memorial to the Bay of Pigs.
Mm-hmm.
And I got up inside there, and I think Jamie wondered what happened to me because I started screaming.
Yeah.
Okay. Remember?
He scared the crap out of me,
I know.
I'm down below. I'm like, what did he fall? What happened?
Did he fall? Yeah, but I'm screaming because I'm back in a KC-135 cockpit and doing all kinds of fun stuff with the crew. And
you were like a little kid. It was great.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay. It was a little bit emotional for me to be back in the cockpit too, but I didn't realize that my good friend Jamie had never been in the boom pod. And so I asked the crew chief, I says, hey, can we go back to the back? And he goes, yeah, sure. Come on back. So tell my listeners about your very first trip into the boom pod of a KC-135, because this is a cool story.
And I had no idea what to expect because I'd never seen one. I didn't even know what it looked like. And so, I think in my mind, I probably pictured that you just kind of, lay down on a mattress and there's everything in front of you. And it sort of is like that, but you walk up to it, and the gangway, for lack of a better term, the entrance into it is not directly over the pod where you actually lay down. Yeah, it's to the side. So if you're looking after the airplane, it's to your right. So you go down a deep step, and then there's a mattress down there. You lay down on that, but then you shimmy over into the pod spot, and there's an overhang over you. So you're actually kind of enclosed. It's open on your right and open on your left, but you have a roof over you on your left and directly over you. So it's a little bit claustrophobic in there. And then there's a little spot to rest your chin, and then all the controls are in front of you. And there's a like a fighter joystick under here that you control with your left hand, right? So it was. Yeah. And then and then there's I'm not sure all the controls, but there's a bunch of controls for all the lights and all the other things to illuminate when you're doing it at night. Really, really cool. I can see where it'd be a good place to take a nap for a while if you're on a long flight. I could get comfy in there. But yeah, it was really, really cool. But I do remember thinking to myself, geez, if you're actually in contested airspace where there's a real threat, that would be it takes some courage to get in there and do that job, because you're in a very vulnerable position. You think about it,
Yes.
laying out with your belly exposed to whatever's coming up at you from below, and I know it's irrational because it's going to mess you up wherever you are in the airplane, but yeah,
And
it's
we're the most overprotected airplane out there too. I mean, in a lot of cases during a lot of the wars that I've been in, Desert Storm, Kosovo, uh, not so much in Afghanistan because it wasn't much of an air threat, but and then in Iraqi freedom,
hmm,
we had F-15s that were just protecting all the
yeah.
high value assets like the rivet joint, us, the AWACS and everything,
Goes to show you how important you were, though, right?
Yeah, yeah. As we
The
always say,
gases in
nobody
the
kicks
air.
ass without tanker gas.
Exactly
Nobody.
right.
And you've mentioned already, the KC-10 carrying 43,000 gallons of gas. We were launching KC-10s out of Al Dhafra during the invasion of Baghdad, and they were taking off with 320,000-pound fuel loads. That's basically what that translates to. 320,000. It'll go to 340, but they had what's called a screen height at the end of the runway at Al Dhafra. It was one tree that they refused to cut down. And so we nicknamed it the United Arab Emirates National Forest. Okay. Because they refused to cut that thing down. And it's been there for years and years and years and years.
Is it still
All
there?
right. As far as I know, it's still there. All right. Because it was something having to do with one of the princes or something like that, that they refused to take this thing out. Right. And so as the weather was getting hotter, the KC-10s were having to download gas in order to take off, which compounded our air refueling complexity and problems, because everybody was downloading gas, but was requiring more because it was getting hotter. We're getting closer to Baghdad. They're taking more gas and all those kinds of things. But yeah, that one tree, the United Arab Emirates National Forest, was the reason they had to take off with the 320 loads and everything. But, and I
So,
told you this too. We were talking about gas. United Arab Emirates was not capable of producing the amount of gas we were
yeah.
using at Al Dhafra. And we had to bring in a very large super tanker that was full of JP5 in order to keep the base going. And they were literally pumping it right from the tanker to the base to keep everything filled there. And the other thing that was crazy too is the KC-10s had to be tugged to the refueling spot. And they had, I think, 5 tugs, and one night 3 of them broke. And they're flying 38 missions. They had 20 airplanes. Were flying 38 missions. We're loading them up with 320,000 fuel loads. So they're using 1.8 million gallons of gas a day.
Man.
I
Wow.
know. Isn't that crazy?
So tell them what I think was the coolest part of that story with the 135s on the ramp. So you ran into a guy out
Yes,
there. The
I
first the
did.
first 135 we went on.
So, I didn't know that this had happened. There was an airplane from MacDill that showed up on the ramp that was also flying missions, and the crew was getting ready to leave, and the crew chiefs were just finishing up refueling the airplane and everything. And I noticed, oops, other shoulder, the 509th patch, and he had one on his shoulder. And I thought, well, this is pretty incredible. He's got a 509th weapons school patch on his shoulder, but he's a crew chief. And what had happened was the 509th Weapons School, which I stood up at Spokane at Fairchild Air Force Base, actually got their manning document increased so that they had their own dedicated crew chiefs to the weapons school. And he had that patch on. And I asked him, I said, what's up with this? And he told me the story. Yeah, I was a crew chief at the 509th Weapons School. Because they go on the road so much, they wanted their own crew chiefs, because the Fairchild wing was the crew chiefs for the airplanes when they went on all these trips. And they go to Hawaii for one trip, they go to Roswell, New Mexico for another trip, and it's all part of the syllabus. And so he was one of those flying crew chiefs that ended up being part of the 509th Weapons School, which I thought was really cool. But he said to me, he goes, well, I just got home from Yokota, back out on the road again. And we always wanted the best crew chiefs to go with us on trips like this. And we knew who the best crew chiefs were. And I understood that he was a really, really good crew chief.
That was pretty obvious from talking
Yeah,
about.
it was very obvious talking to him, wasn't it? That guy
crap.
was a great maintainer. Okay. And somebody that you want to have around the jet all the time.
This is a guy I'd like to hire when you leave.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not like he's got to come work for me.
Oh yeah. And anyway, his name was Dan. And by the way, I do have texts from him now too.
Oh, sweet.
So as we're talking, he says, well, this isn't my regular airplane. And then I asked him, I says, well, what's your regular airplane? He says, my regular airplane is 8019. I went, what?
He actually did that too, folks. He went,
what? He goes, and he looks at me kind of funny, like, yeah, my regular airplane is 8019. What? And to all my listeners out there, aircraft 8019 was a model during Desert Storm and is the airplane I flew on my very first combat support mission on the opening night of Desert Storm, refueling Coors 31, 32, 33, and 34 F4G Wild Weasels and an EF-111. It was named after a tool, 7-1. Anyway, EF-111. That was the airplane I flew on my very first combat mission, and he's the crew chief on that airplane, and it's still flying.
Small world, right?
Yeah. And remember the other thing we did? I asked him, I said, how many hours are on the airplane? Remember we opened up the maintenance forms, okay? And it was over 26,000 hours, 19,000 landings, and over 6,000 full stop landings.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea of how these airplanes are being used. But yeah, he was a crew chief in the weapons school that I helped stand up, and is the crew chief for the airplane I flew the first night of Desert Storm, 8019.
Can't make this stuff up.
You can't, can you? And I mean, you talk about how random is that?
Yeah.
That I would meet a guy on a ramp who was part of this incredible school for tanker pilots, KC-135 pilots. By the way, they're standing up the KC-46 school now with a lot of the same stuff that they're using, of course, at the 509th Weapons Squadron. Okay. And then to find out, not only was he part of the school, but he's the actual crew chief on the airplane I flew the first night of Desert Storm, 8019. How random is that? I mean,
because how often do you get out to Portsmouth too?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That we would meet in Portsmouth. He would be part of the 509th Weapons School, and he's the crew chief on 8019.
Yeah.
I don't believe in coincidences anymore. And that is the perfect story for why I don't believe in those kinds of things anymore. Okay. But yeah, I've since sent him, because one of the things he asked me, says, sir, do you have any pictures of it? And I go, well, as a matter of fact, I do. I had my camera with me everywhere I went. And he says, I would really love to get some pictures of this. And I sent him some of those pictures of the jet sitting on the ramp at Jeddah. We had Aladdin lamps that were painted over the crew entry door that signified how many missions it had flown. All right. We used Aladdin lamps on the KC-135s. And one of the other cool things about the airplane was it had nose art. It was called Rolling Thunder.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, it was this beautiful Indian squaw in the big headdress holding a spear with a leather bikini on. All right. That the Saudis said, you got to paint over that thing.
I was going to say, they would not love that.
No, they didn't. They said, you got to paint over that thing. Okay. So they used some kind of water soluble paint. And after the first night of the opening night of the war, we had like 2 or 3 days of thunderstorms, Jamie, and it washed it off. And so they had to go back out there, and go wacka, 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 and paint over. Okay. Well, I flew the airplane home on the 1st of February, I wasn't there for the whole war. Val was pregnant with our oldest son, Ryan, at the time. And I went, and I was going to upgrade to IP. And so we flew that airplane home, and the crew chiefs all said, and remember, I told you, Vonnie Peterson was the crew chief. She took all that paint off and left it on the ramp. And it was funny because a lot of the Saudi guys were driving around it, looking at it anyway. But I had a picture of it on the ramp with her unpainted, not painted over. And I sent him that with all the Aladdin lamps. Oh, and the crab. The crab. The crab. When you go through Diego Garcia, any airplane that went through Diego Garcia, they would paint, they had a stencil for it too, Jamie. They would paint this big red crab from the stencil. They'd spray it on the airplane, like this. That meant you had been on the island of Diego Garcia during Desert Shield or Desert Storm, all right? And it was this big red crab on the side of the airplane. And I remember landing at Diego Garcia, and I'm talking to the crew chief, I'm still in the seat and everything, and they're coming up to take us, to billeting, all that kind of stuff. And I see this crew chief get out of a truck, and he's got a stencil and a spray can. And whenever you have somebody with cardboard and a spray can coming up to your airplane, they're up to no good.
Yeah, right.
All right. Something weird's about to happen to your airplane. All right. And so I see him kind of disappear under the airplane, and I tell the crew chief, I go, "What's he doing down there? What's he doing?" And he's laughing. The crew chief is laughing. Okay. And he's going, "It'll be okay. It'll be okay, Captain. It'll be okay. Don't put your hand on it when you come down." And I'm like going, what's going on? He goes, "You'll see it when you get down the stairs." Okay. And that's what it was, is this crew chief had come out to the airplane and had painted this red crab, signifying that I had stopped on the island of Diego Garcia. And every airplane that came through Diego Garcia got one of those red crabs for like years.
Did they not have a lot to do down there?
No, not really. And see, the thing was, Jamie, they had made Diego Garcia into this great big huge B-52 base. B-52s were going to fly from Diego Garcia, and it's like 4 hours away from Iraq, and fly up, drop their bombs, and then come back. And as we're parking the airplane, there's, I think, like 8 B-52s parked down the ramp. And if you go on Google Earth, you can see it's a massive ramp. It's a really, really big ramp. And you can park B-52s, B-1s, and B-2s had their own little special shelters. But they had these huge trailers full of bombs out in front of them, 750-pound bombs, 500-pound bombs, that they were practicing loading on the airplanes, getting ready for Desert Storm. It was the craziest thing. But yeah, so we had Aladdin lamps signifying the missions that we flew for Desert Storm, this big red crab on the side of the airplane that said, okay, we'd been through the island of Diego Garcia. And then they had these crossed swords for signifying that the airplane had flown during Desert Shield. And that's all on the side of the airplane in the picture that I sent to him. So, and he said, Dan said what he's going to do, he's going to blow those pictures up, and he's going to put them, there's a cabinet above the.
Yeah, he's going to do like a heritage cabinet.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
He's going to do it on this door that's above what's called the navigator's table. The boom sits there now, and there's this door into this cabinet, and he's going to put all these pictures on top of that. So
very cool.
Yeah. Again, it's just another aviation story that I'm sure a lot of my listeners, and you've given us a lot of them here, parking A-10s, all these P-8s showing up in the middle of the night, and people don't realize what it takes to support things like that. Okay.
Wow,
and tell them about the hydraulic fluid in one of the hogs.
Oh, the broken A-10. Oh my God. Yeah. Kikes. All right. So yeah, there's another
great story. This is a great story.
So it was the back in 2021, we had an air show, Thunder over New Hampshire. And we hadn't had an air show in probably almost 10 years before this. So it was, it was my first air show, and I was still in maintenance at the time. So it was September 12th, actually, I think was the date. But if you've ever done an air show, you know that the time leading up to the air show is complete chaos. You've got airplanes showing up left and right. Nobody is doing much of anything at work because they're busy watching practice on like Thursday and Friday. And then the air show itself goes off like with military precision. And then Monday rolls around and it's back to chaos because everybody's trying to get out at the same time. And all the people who were in for the statics are trying to fly home and they just want to be done. So I'm just walking in the door. It's like 10 past 7 in the morning. Beautiful fall, early fall or late summer day.
Yeah.
And I get this phone call on my cell, and it's a number I don't recognize. I decided to roll the dice and pick it up anyway. And it's this guy on the other end, and it's this panicked A-10 crew chief. And he says, "Hey man, I heard you're the jet guy there." And I'm like, "Yeah, I am." He said, I got an A-10 down on the guard ramp, man. It's broken. It's leaking hydraulic fluid, and I got to get there. What the problem is, I just got to get the reservoir service so he can get out of there and get back home here to Maryland. Is there anything you can do for me? Can you service that thing, man? Because the guard can't do it. They don't have the tools for it. And I'm like, I don't know. Let me see. Like, tell me a little bit about the airplane. And so discussing with him what he needed, I'm like, what fluid is it? Is it the red stuff? Is it 5606? He said, yeah, it's the red stuff. It's that stuff. I said, okay, great. So I have a Bowser. I have the fluid. I believe I have the connection I need to hook up to it and pump the fluid into the reservoir. I said, I should be able to service it, but I got to get the airplane down here. I said, and it's 2 miles away. So I need you to talk to the guard, let them know they're going to have to escort my people onto your ramp to tow the airplane down here to the FBO so I can work on it because I can't work on the guard ramp, right? He says, all right, man, I'll call them. He said, what? Go ahead and send your people down. I'll let them know you're coming. I said, all right, great. So talking about this earlier, when I went out to my line staff, and normally if I tell my line staff, hey guys, I need you to go 2 miles away, take a tug and go get a Challenger, drag it all the way back here to the FBO. They'll be like, no, I don't want to do that, and they'll do it, but they'll give me a hard time. But if you tell them it's an A-10, they're like, they fight over it. Like, I'm going, no, I'm going, and let's get the fighter bar. Well, I got it. Let's head over
I
there.
want to see this
I
gun.
want to see this thing. Yeah. And so they end up going down there and I meet them down there and I'm with them to hook up the airplane. And as they're starting to tow it back to the FBO, they're on there taking selfies. Here I am towing an A-10, how often do you get to do this? And meanwhile, you're sitting on the tug and guess what's pointed right at that tug, that gun. Of course it's empty, but so they eventually as I see the airplane coming down the ramp to the FBO, I get another call from the crew chief. Hey man, I got some bad news. I'm like, oh, what is it? He says, it's not that 5606 red stuff. It's that other red stuff. And it's like 83282. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I have it. I'm going to have to purge the Bowser and do all this stuff as it's going to set us back about a half an hour. I'm like, does that work for you? He's like, yeah, man, as long as he's out of there by 10 a.m. So I'm like, all right, cool. So I go through all this trouble to purge the Bowser, change the filter, clean it and put the right stuff in it. And I've got some really cool pictures. I went out there with the pilot and, he showed me where all the access points were and I wound up servicing it. And that pilot was so happy to get out of there. I actually wound up helping him in the cockpit. I stowed his ramp for his ladder for him and everything. I've got a great picture of me marshaling him out and Andrew, one of my mechanics, just happened to get the picture as the A-10's here. I'm in the middle and there's a Thunderbird taxiing out in the background.
It's a great picture. Great picture.
I love that picture. That's like my favorite picture. It's my background
on his computer.
But this is the kind of thing, I wasn't in the military, so I would never get the opportunity to put hands on an A-10. And interestingly enough, when the A-10s came when they were on their way back from Air Defender, not on the way up, but then we were on their way back, they stopped in again. We ended up doing the same job for one of them. We ended up servicing the reservoir with the same equipment that I set up to do that other one. And it was so funny. Slippy, the crew chief's like, he's like, didn't you tell me you once serviced the hydraulics on one of these? I'm like, I did. And I told you like 10 times. And he laughed and he goes, yeah, guess what I need now? I said, you need to carry the van. He said, yes. I'm like, awesome. I'm like, I have the stuff. We have the technology. We can repair this. So yeah, that was pretty neat. But then again, that's one of the other things that if they go to other places and bases, they don't necessarily have the support to do that and to get that accomplished. They might have had to send a crew chief out to do that, whereas we were able to do it for them and send them on their way. So yeah, very cool.
And
I love
see,
my job, in
that's,
case it's not obvious.
and you know, while you and I were out there running around the ramp,
Yeah.
again with Dan, remember what I asked him when I was standing in the wheel well? I said, remember, I forgot to put it on video.
Yeah. It was very, so he actually said, and he said that unprompted too. Like, you know, he actually, you caught that because I remember he said, oh yeah, we love coming here. You guys are the best. This is the best of the FBOs. I'm like, and I said to Mark, I'm like, I didn't pay him to say that. And he goes, well, we got to get him saying it again, you know? So
Yeah.
it was really nice. And so really that is the thing that to me, that's what I love most about this. When I get that feedback from the customers and in particularly the military, when they tell us that, man, you make our lives so easy. You know, we go overseas and we're deployed, we come back and it's so nice to come here. And, you know, y'all are, I get a little, you know, he said, you know, y'all take such good care of us. And that makes me feel so good. I just love that.
Yeah. And he wasn't the only one we heard that from too. So again, this is why people go to companies and organizations like you and Port City Air, okay? Because of your customer service, your relationships, and your ability to serve your customer and do it gladly at 1:30 in the morning with 100 pizzas on, you know, a baggage cart going out there, okay? And that one white box.
That drives me nuts. Yeah. 100 boxes is one white one. They're all brown.
They're all paper, you know, they're all cardboard, all brown, and there's one white one, okay, that Katie's you know, taken out to the airplane.
Somebody said something. It was like, is that like the one gluten-free one? I'm like, no, it's just a random white box. Just to mess with me. I mean, we do that, and we do that. Look, we do that for everybody too. We have regular GA crews. We buy lunch all the time, and we put it up there. You know, it's another level of service. I think that, and that's the other thing too. Is it's not just military. We also, you know, NetJets has taken a huge liking to us. Fly exclusive. Out of North Carolina, these bigger 135 operators, these fractionals, they've, you know, we apply that service philosophy across the board. Everybody gets it here, you know.
Well, and I think one of the great things about this too, and you told me about this when we were there, is your service there at Port City Air has really done great business for Portsmouth, because tell them who stayed open to make the pizzas.
Right. So there's a place called Pizza Factory, which is where we buy probably 70% of our pizzas from them. There's another one in town that's good, but they're smaller and they can't handle the volume, so we tend to get them mostly. But yeah, so we're like, okay, they're going to be here at 12:30. They won't get the pizzas till at the earliest about 1, right? And so we wanted them to be somewhat hot, right? So we called them and they're like, listen, is there any way we can get you to make these pizzas late, stay late? And they're like, oh, for you guys, yeah. You know, they usually close at 11, but they stayed open until about the pizzas started showing up at about 1:15 midnight to be distributed. So, you know, and they, like, their drivers even stayed late, you know, and of course it costs, you know, you have to pay for that, and, you know, they're not going to do it for free, but a lot of places just, you know, wouldn't even do it. And there's, you know, the hotels in town. I mean, we had a really conservative estimate last year that we book about 7,000 rooms a year for the hotels in Portsmouth. And then you add in all the meals and all the businesses the bars get. And it's one of the reasons we need 21 crew cars, because we'll have so many crews come in, but sometimes we'll have to book 30 rooms in a hotel for 2 to 3 days. You know, Air Defender was huge for hotels. And then what we come to find out, we actually started tracking every single flight this year, and just military craft and cargo, I think we had, as of March 1st, we're on a pace to hit actually about 12,000 rooms for the year.
Wow.
And it's actually been a slow year so far. like up until the past 2 weeks, when you came in, when the military
yeah,
traffic started to really pick up again, it's been a
yeah.
slow year. So we're conservatively estimating around 12,000 rooms a year. We should probably finish at. So yeah, we do bring a lot of business in here.
Yeah.
And until recently, most people didn't even know we existed. We did it very quietly. So I've been more involved lately with the Chamber of Commerce and some of the local businesses to try to make ties. And with as much as we do here, we really should be into the fabric of the community.
But
But
see, and
again,
that's one of the things that I want to emphasize to everybody is look how one aviation company touches so many different things around, and using Portsmouth as an example, okay, a pizza company, hotels, the catering company has got to get all of their catering goods from somewhere,
yeah,
Costco or wherever it is, okay.
yeah.
And so look at how aviation has touched the city of Portsmouth in such a way that, I haven't heard about this kind of service and business anywhere else, you know,
And
and
that's hand in hand too, Mark. The other part of the component of that is also really, really important is that the city is so welcoming to the military crews, and they go out of their way to service them.
yeah,
And I really think Portsmouth understands the history of this place as it
yeah,
relates to the city.
yeah,
Um, and that's, it's also really nice because you and Val stayed at the Sheraton when you were in
yeah,
town, and it's such a walkable city. With great
yeah,
restaurants local, great bars all local, and the people are so nice. So it's the kind of place you want to go to. It's a
yeah.
very easy decision to make.
Well,
And
and I think this is a great lesson for other communities from a business standpoint too, that have these kinds of operations and being able to build an operation like you guys did, but look how affected other things around you and has brought this incredible commerce
yeah,
into the city of Portsmouth,
mhm.
you know?
Very symbiotic.
Well, and I think that's another great lesson learned. You guys have built this incredible company, but at the same time, you know, you've had a great team around you in the city of Portsmouth that has helped you do this. You've had very motivated people working for you that said, hey, we could service more by doing this and getting this and this and this if we bought this one piece of equipment, a
Mhm.
tow bar, for crying out loud, a C5 tow bar. All right. And being able
Mark,
to
if
go
I
out towards
told you
that.
if I told you how much money we spend just in locks, and I'm not talking about raw salmon, I mean liquid oxygen, because we have to have it on station for these military aircraft that come
Yeah.
through. But the thing
I'm
about
sure it
locks
astound
is,
me.
yeah, and you have locks out there, but it's always bleeding off, especially in the summertime. So we have to get regular, recurring
Phillips.
deliveries of it, and we have the
Yeah.
locks cart for servicing everything. But it's something you have to have
Yeah.
here to make sure that they can come here, and they're not going to get stuck here because you didn't have it.
Yeah.
That's the threat to them, is
Or
that
they're going to go by you because you don't have it. They're going to
or go
pass
overflow
you,
you or
go,
go
go
somewhere else.
overfly you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, Jamie, it's been great to spend more
Sure
time with
has.
you. We talked for another half hour here.
Yeah.
And again, thank you for being on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. And once again, for hosting Val and I back there in Portsmouth. Okay.
Anytime, you're welcome to come back. In fact, I think you will be coming back at some point soon.
Coming
So
back in August when the
awesome.
American Association of Aviation Executives has their big meeting there. I'm going to be a keynote speaker, and it'll be a lot of fun to see you. Okay.
Fantastic. Love it. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Take
Okay,
care,
brother.
brother.
I'm going to end it here. I'm going to put it on pause or